Hello, everybody. Uh, Here we are at part two. The government has your baby's DNA, and this article is pretty much finished. I'm gonna finish up the last paragraph and then show you what I was talking about with that other article that was talking about how your DNA was actually been stored and used way before 2007 when it was put into law. And so now we know that it's a law, but they didn't even really go into too much of detail with it. But we know that. Now I'm going to try to show you how it was actually going on before the bill was even signed. I just thought that was kind of funny. I just noticed that, like, uh, hell, the government has my DNA. It's kind of funny. Sad, but funny. Guess a little humor's good when you, with, this depressing news. It says, what parents can do. In some states, including Minnesota and Texas, the states are required to destroy baby's DNA sample if a parents request it. Parents who want their baby's DNA destroyed are asked to fill out this form in Minnesota and this form in Texas. The parents in other states have less recourse, says Therrell, who runs the genetic testing group. Quote, you'd probably have to write a letter to the state saying, quote, please destroy my sample, he says. He adds, however, it is not clear whether a state would necessarily obey your wishes. Quote, I suspect it would be very difficult to get those states to destroy your baby's sample, he says. And so, yeah, of course, right? But we're going to go to this other, and this is originally from Infowars.net, and it was written by Steve Watson on May 2nd, 2008. And it says, Bush signs bill to take all newborns' DNA. So, yeah, I don't know how many people dislike Infowars, and they say that, oh, it's a conspiracy site. But hey, these guys are, talking about, they're talking about issues here in 2008, 2 years after you got a mainstream article finally covering this law that was passed, right? So, conspiracy theories or not, they're covering this stuff as it's coming by because they see the privacy concerns here. But the government just rolls and steams forward and rolls forward with what they're doing, and then it only takes a couple of years for people to finally for it to catch up, right? So when people like this mother was like, what? What are you talking about stored in a database? So most people just aren't aware that the bill was passed. It says President Bush last week signed into law, mind you, 2008, signed into law a bill which will see the federal government begin to screen the DNA of all newborn babies in the U.S. within 6 months, a move critics have described as the first step towards the establishment of a national DNA database. Described as, quote, the National Contingency Plan, the justification for the new law, S 1858, known as the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act of 2007, is that it represents preparation for any sort of, quote, public health emergency. The bill states that the federal government should, quote, continue to carry out, coordinate, and expand research in newborn screening and, quote, maintain a central clearinghouse of current information on newborn screening, ensuring that the clearinghouse is available on the internet and is updated at least quarterly. Sections of the bill also make it clear that DNA may be used in genetics experiments and tests. Read the full bill here, and I'll try to get all these links posted up with these videos. So it says one healthcare expert, prominent critic of the DNA screening is Twyla Brace, president of the Citizens Council on Healthcare, who has written a detailed analysis of the new law in which he warns that it represents the first program of population-wide genetic testing. Brace states that the 1858 and HR 3825, the House version of the bill, will establish a national list of genetic conditions for which newborns and children are to be tested, establish protocols for the linking and sharing of genetic test results nationwide, which is the database, build surveillance systems for tracking the health status and health outcomes of individuals diagnosed at birth with a genetic defect or trait. So this woman, this mother in the CNN story, this is exactly what happened, right? So the doctors found out about it, right? Which, in a sense can be good, but we all know that a lot of times it's going to be used for the more darker reasons. Use the newborn screening program as an opportunity for government agencies to identify, list, and study secondary conditions of individuals and their families. Subject citizens to genetic research without their knowledge or consent. And it says, soon, under this bill, the DNA of all citizens will be housed in government genomic biobanks and considered governmental property for the government research. Let me repeat this because I just mentioned this in my last video. Soon, under this bill, the DNA of all citizens will be housed in a government genomic biobank and considered governmental property for government research. Brace writes, the DNA taken at birth from every citizen is essentially owned by the government, and every citizen becomes a potential subject of government-sponsored genetic research. The public is clueless, and 1858 imposes a federal agenda of DNA data banking and population-wide genetic research. It does not require consent, and there are no requirements to fully inform parents about the warehousing of their child's DNA for the purposes of genetic research. Because if the parents knew, they probably would stop it, right? And they would try to fill out a form and do all the lengthy process to get it, eliminated, whatever, like that individual in the last CNN article said. It takes a lot to do it. You got to request the state to destroy the DNA. In a previous report, we outlined the consequences of the already existing DNA warehousing operation in Minnesota, a program that the Citizens Council on Healthcare has been following closely for a number of years. And Ms. Brace explained in a statement last month that the state health department officials are now seeking exemption for the so-called DNA warehouse from Minnesota privacy law. This would enable the state officials to continue to take DNA of newborn infants without their consent, which would also set the precedent for nationwide policy on DNA screening. DNA of newborns has already been harvested, tested, and stored and experimented with nationwide. The National Conference of State Legislators lists all 50 states as well as the District of Columbia, the various statutes and regulatory provisions under this newborn's DNA is already being collected. In addition, Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act of 2007 merely establishes this practice within the law. Another vocal critic of the bill is Texas Congressman Ron Paul, who made the following comments before the U.S. House of Representatives. I cannot support legislation no matter how much I sympathize with the legislation's stated goals. Like we said, it's a good, like, hey, you get older, you got, your DNA says you're more prone to get cystic fibrosis, so let's get you checked out. That exceeded, so he says, I sympathize with the legislature's stated goals that it exceeded the constitutional limitations on federal power or in any way threatens the liberty of American people. Since 1858 violates the Constitution and may have unintended consequences that will weaken the American healthcare system and further erode medical privacy, I must oppose it. Paul, a medical doctor himself, continued, the bill gives the federal bureaucracy the authority to develop a model newborn screening program. Madam Speaker, the federal government lacks both the constitutional authority and the competence to develop a newborn screening program adequate for a nation as large and diverse as the U.S. Those of us in the medical profession should be particularly concerned about policies allowing the government officials and state-favored interests to assess our medical records without our consent. My review of S1858 indicates the drafters of the legislation made no effort to ensure these newborn screening programs do not violate the privacy rights of parents and children. In fact, by directing federal bureaucrats to create a contingency plan for newborn screening in the event of public health disaster, this bill may lead to further erosions of medical privacy. And it says, as recent history so eloquently illustrates, politicians are more than willing to take, and people are more willing to cede their liberty during times of emergency. So there you go, everybody. That was the last part of this two-part series on the government has your baby's DNA. So I didn't really roll into the whole DNA being stored prior to that, but I guess I just wanted to keep it limited to this and give you a little more background on this because they didn't really talk too much about the actual bill. So I just decided to stick with what the 2007 bill says, or 2008 bill. So thank you, everybody, and Thank you for checking out these videos.